talk about Browserify Marionette. So, the title says better apps, right? Like Browserify and Marionette equals better apps. And I think that might be a little deceiving. And what it really should say is like Browserify and Marionette equal more efficient apps. So we can actually use Browserify to help us in our development process to kind of like move things along a bit faster and help us make things a bit more reusable. So that's essentially what we're going to cover. So if you want to follow along, the slides are available online. First, let me say that the actual slideshow is a Browserify Marionette app that I made. Nothing like eating your own dog food. So you can follow along the slides. Annotated source code is available, or you can just like go straight to GitHub. Yeah. So I'll give everybody a second for that. All right, no one's going. All right, so who's this guy, right? Who am I? My name is Kurt. Joanne did a great job of introducing me. There's not really too much else there. If you want to follow me on Twitter, you can. GitHub, and then I am also a British intelligence officer, so you can also check me out there. All right, cool. So let's get started on the real fun stuff. So what is Browserify, right? Like it's all the rage these days. Everybody's using it. They're teaching it to kids at the age of 3. It's really fantastic, right? But like, what the heck is it? So I stole this right from the website of browserify.org. It says Browserify lets you require modules in the browser by bundling up all of your dependencies. Right? So again, cool. That's great. But like, what does that really mean? Right, so 2 of the core things that I find most useful about Browserify is 1, it provides you scope without you having to provide it for yourself. So when you're writing in a file, you can declare variables, you can write things, and you don't have to worry about polluting the global namespace. You're free to just write it as if you were whoever's familiar with working in a Node environment, right? Common JS style modules where we don't have to worry about scope like that. So this is number 1 thing that I love about it. The other thing is that it allows you to, require things, but it makes sure all of your dependencies are in place for you when you want to execute a certain chunk of code, right? So when we have a file and we want to require things in, we're in a browser. We're not using AMD. Things aren't being loaded asynchronously for us. We're just loading them before we even get to runtime. It's just building us this nice file that bundles up everything for us and makes sure that we have what we need when we need it. Cool. So like, a little bit about what it is. So why use it? 2 things I always ask when I'm going to look at a tool is, what does it bring to the table? Like, what is it that makes it so great that I can't get anywhere else? And then how's it going to make my life and my team's life easier, right? How's it going to ease our development process? These are the type of things that I always want to consider when I'm looking at using something. So we're going to get into a little bit of like some of the things that I find where Browserify really shines. And the very first one is obviously common JS style modules, right? So this was the first thing that really turned me on to Browserify. I was like, wait, you mean I can write Node code in the client? Like, this is mind-boggling. This is fantastic. There's a million things about common JS style modules that I love, and we'll get into that a little bit more. But as you can see, it's just so much cleaner, right? Like no IFI wrapped around all this stuff, no namespace in there, no nothing. We declare what we need to declare, and then we make it available for other chunks of code to access it and use it. Access to NPM modules, right? So now in the client, aside from Node, we have access to the NPM ecosystem. This is another amazing feature that opens up a lot of doors, right? So, there's still some things that aren't quite available yet, but most things that you would find and install with Bower, you can now install with NPM and just bundle them in with Browserify. This is a great thing. And then lastly, easy build integration, right? So it's not really hard to add Browserify to your current workflow, whether you're on a current project or starting a new one. It's relatively easy to get started with. It could be as simple as running it from the command line or configuring some options in a package JSON or integrating right with gulp or grunt, right? Cool. So like we understand why we would use it. Let's look at setting it up. So as I said, at its simplest form, we can just run right from the command line. So we just give it an entry point. specify an output directory, and then specify a couple flags if we want. Like here, if we want source maps, we can add the flag for debugging. So if we want a little bit more out of it, like we want to add transforms or we want to add a couple more options and things like that, we need a place to store that stuff. Nobody wants to run things from the command line every time anyway, right? So you can configure it right in package.json. Like a lot of people are moving to like NPM build scripts, where we're just using run this and watchify and things like that. So it's very easy to integrate. Browserify just knows to look in package.json for options. And then again, so like looking at it in a grunt file, right? So it's pretty much the exact same thing, except the only difference here is we're not calling anything from the command line. We're just specifying our entry point and our output. And we can handle the same type of options. So when you talk about setting up Browserify, sometimes it requires a bit of work. This is one of the things that obviously comes with like any type of new technology or build process. And so one of the things that we have to do sometimes is a bit of shimming, right? So it could be something as easy as this, right? So if we want to run Backbone Marionette, you'll get this weird error where jQuery won't be defined on Backbone. So we have to kind of shim it in. And so you can see how this just extends the build a little bit. So all we're doing is we have this file where we just call in Backbone and attach jQuery. And then you see it updates our grunt configuration just a little bit, and we just make sure that that shim runs before we get to running our main file. And then you can see how we can use them. If we've installed them with NPM, we can just require them right like that. So one thing I want to talk about here, though, is if we do this and we require jQuery underscore Backbone and Backbone and Marionette, we're requiring all of that into our bundle. And so what that means is that in our output file, all of these libraries exist with our application code. They're all necessary for everything to run. Depending on the size of your application and what you're pulling in, you can imagine that pulling in more and more libraries can get really heavy and get really expensive. So this is one of the things that you always want to consider. There's a couple ways to get around this, so we're going to actually talk about that in a second. So one of the methods that I use is I'll do this. I'll actually take my dependencies and minify them and package them up and drop them in like you would. Now, there's some pluses and some minuses to this, right? So the plus is that every time I update my application code, I don't have to update all of my dependencies as well, right? So this is good, especially if you're dealing with something like mobile or something like that. You can cache the dependencies and you only need to update them when they change, and your application code can update more freely without forcing them to pull anything down. One of the caveats with this is that we're exposing globals. Like one of the whole points of common JS style modules and what we should talk about is you don't want to pollute the namespace. We remove the need for a namespace. So if I just go into any file now in my Browserify project, I can just use $ or Backbone or Marionette, and these things will be defined without me requiring them. And that's not what we want, right? We want everyone to adhere to the common JS style. So what I do is I have a shims directory, and literally I just import these shims. And then I require them like I would anything else, right? So yes, the globals do exist. Do we access them and use them? No, we don't. One other thing that you can do is there's a plugin called Browserify Shim that will kind of do this for you. The only reason I don't use it is because it doesn't support putting the configuration anywhere than the package JSON file, and I don't like to have build configuration in multiple places. That's really the only reason. Cool. So one of the last things I want to talk about is transforms. All right, so this is one of the key features of Browserify too. This is one of the things that really won me over, and one of the things that is just like I've found so useful. So here we're specifying that we want like handlebarsify as a transform, and you can see in the presentation down in the composite view, I'm including this partial, and it's a handlebars file, right? I'm actually requiring it. So what Browserify is going to do is before this even runs and before it's packaged and bundled, it's going to run this file through handlebars, and what it's actually going to require for template is a function. So on the surface, this might not seem like very much, but when you think about like how Angular tries to handle loading templates, right? So we're going to call something asynchronously, and then we're going to cache. We're going to build it into a function, and then we're going to cache that for use later. Anything like that, like all that has to happen initially at page run, right? So we have to fetch all these views, and then we have to cache them, and then we have to use them. Whereas when you're using Browserify, all of these is already done for you. So at runtime, you're dealing with just functions. So immediately, you've just like eliminated 3 steps for every single view when you require a template, which saves you a lot, especially in like large apps. All right, so we're going to talk a bit about Browserify Marionette now, because that's what we really want to focus on. Now that we know how we can use Browserify and some of the neat tricks and things that it provides us, how can we actually use it with Marionette and develop apps more efficiently? All right, so one of the first things I want to focus on is something that Browserify really helps separate, is the idea of configuration and initialization. These are 2 things that I feel like rarely should happen together. And you'll see that in a lot of cases that they do happen together, and a lot of code that is not prepared in like a modular fashion. You basically want to define in one location and use in another. So a good example of this is the app, right? So if we look at the app, this is a very simple explanation, right? Cut down for the slides. But so all we do is we create the app and we get it ready for export. Now in here we could add some helpers, right? So if we want to add some app level helper functions to the application, we could do that. What we don't want to do is start initializing things and start running code in this file. Like this file has a single purpose, and that's to prepare the app, right? Which then brings us to the entry point of the application, right? So this is the file we told Browserify we want to run. And we require the app here, right? And we require dependencies we need to start it. We set up any handlers, we set up any initialization, and then we can start everything. All right, so it should never happen in the same place, right? And what this leads to is keeping things small. One of the best features of having this is that we don't have to worry about like, where am I going to put this, or what namespace am I going to attach this to, or maybe I can bundle these 6 things together so that I don't have to make like 3 more namespaces for everything, right? It gets very hard to like keep track of what you're using. And then honestly, like if your namespaces are deep, sure, like you know what namespace it's on, but does that give you any idea of where that code is coming from or where it's running? And in large projects, it can give you great insight into exactly where you need to go when you want to find other pieces of code. So again, like talking about this single responsibility. So we pull in any dependencies that we need for the slide. We set up anything that we need to set up, and we export it so that something else can use it later, like a collection view, pause view, whatever, anything that needs to access it. And again, I know where everything is coming from, right? Like I left out a lot of the requires in here, but if I were requiring certain things, I would know exactly where to go to find that piece because it's a path to the file. All right, so one of the core things that we touched on a little bit was templates, and I want to talk about how one of the I find to be the worst features of common JS style modules, and that's dealing with paths. So there's ways around this, like Browserify actually has access. You can actually use the path module, and that's another thing, real quick. You have access to core node modules. There's actually client versions, like event emitter, path, stream. There's a few other really good ones, but you can use them just like you would, in a node environment. So that's cool. But yeah, so what you end up with is like really long, verbose requires, right? Especially for something like templates. Let's say you work in a large project and templates are actually kept separate because UX or somebody might actually go in there and be adding classes and doing things and altering style and stuff like that, and you're doing development. Well, we don't want to require down like 4 levels, like partials, user, edit, and keep going down. Like that would get quite annoying. So we're going to use our build tool and we're going to use Browserify to make this so much easier. All right, so we just write a custom grunt task. Compile templates. All we're doing in this case, I'm just recursing over my slides directory, and I'm just building module.exports whatever the file name equals require, and I'm just grabbing the slide. And then we're just writing all of these right to index.js, all right, writing config templates. And what this gives us it gives us this templates index file, and it has all of our functions already ready for us, all of our templates pre-included, and now we can just require templates and just call them by name. This is a very dumbed down version, right? It only has one level, but you could easily add support for namespacing and other things like that to build a more verbose system for handling that. Then you can just require templates from one location and have nice JavaScript syntax for actually using them. So one thing I want to focus on is modules, right? So in Marionette, it's rare that you'll see a tutorial or see anything where you don't see Marionette modules and see something that looks kind of similar to this, right? So we'll have a module, and one might handle loading views, and we're attaching views to it, and then we have another module that has like some type of initialization going on, right? And so what this tells me is that when I look at a module, I have no idea what it does until I investigate it. Right? It's basically become namespaces and ways to kick off functionality. That's essentially what they end up boiling down to. And this can lead to a lot of confusion, especially in large projects, right? Like I go into one module, I would expect that when I go into the next module, I would see something similar, but rarely is that the case, right? Rarely. But when we don't need namespaces and we have places to put views, we don't need to worry about attaching them all to a namespace because we can just require any view that we need. We can actually give modules a much better purpose. So what I like to use modules for now is for structuring and destructuring large chunks of functionality, requiring in these templates, requiring in your collections, loading these things up and getting them ready to be used. And now when I go into a module file, I know that this is what I will see every single time. There's no confusion. I don't have to wonder if this module is giving me views. I don't have to wonder if this module is kicking something off. I know exactly what it's doing. And again, it keeps things dry and it keeps things simple. Configuration, no initialization. Right, so I want to take another second to talk about getting really dry. Browserify helps you get dry. It helps you clean your code up. It helps you develop things faster. But so far we've been looking at everything at the code level, right? Like project level. But what about above that? What about reusability across projects and across any type of system, right? So now why can't we just do something like this, right? So now we can take something, if it's generic enough, we can package it up in an NPM module, and we can ship it out, put it out on the line, out in the cloud. And, and now we can use it in any project, in any situation. And this sounds great, in theory, but, here's the catch, business logic, right? Client-specific code, things that don't belong in public registries. Well, now we can just do this. Right? NPM Enterprise for the win. So you can basically set up NPM Enterprise. You can, link and kind of mirror public packages. You can whitelist and blacklist packages. You can do all this stuff, man. And you can push all of your stuff that is company specific or project specific to a private repo. So now again, you can still share the same code, all across your system, all across your organization, and have access to it in a nice private way. If you really want to get fancy, you could build an interface just like NPM. Imagine if somebody wants to go and oh man, I need to add infinite scrolling collection view or something like that. They just hop right on the private registry and search and see if it exists, checking by tag names, all the things that you already do for NPM modules, right? So now people aren't rewriting code all over your application. It could just help you clean things up a lot. So I'm hoping what this is showing is that Browserify is not just a way to just package up your application code, but you can really use it in a lot of ways to really speed up development and really move things on a lot faster. A half hour is never enough time to talk, right? And people always want more. But unfortunately, I feel this is just an intro and just to get you guys started and get you wanting to think about it, right? So if you want some more resources, the first one that I would read is this one right here, because it takes Browserify and it turns it from magic into something that's tangible, that you understand what it's doing, which is the key, right? So we definitely need to know how tools work before we use them. The next one is just a list of nice articles on Browserify's website. You can get different recipes for different types of things and see like some of the cool tricks people are doing with Browserify. And then lastly, or not lastly, actually, there's one more after this. So Marionettify is a project that I found that is a Browserify Marionette app. I don't know too much about the inner workings of the project, but it does use Browserify Marionette. And again, this slideshow is a Browserify Marionette app, so you can view the source code too. And then lastly, if you want to know more about NPM Enterprise, it's just right on their website. You just click the Enterprise link in the header, and you're good to go. And that's it.